Before we talk about the American dream, perhaps we should pause for a few minutes in New York City, because the place once called the city that never sleeps is now the place where that very dream is forced to sleep outdoors. New York, a symbol of opportunity, upward mobility, and prosperity, is revealing a different truth. A city where the cost of living has become unaffordable for tens of thousands of people who still work there every day. When rent is higher than the median wage, when support programs are insufficient to keep anyone in their homes, when a small apartment costs as much as a year's income, then the car becomes an involuntary shelter and the streets become an extension of a crumbling housing system. The story of communities living in vehicles is not just a phenomenon of economic hardship, but is gradually becoming a mirror reflecting the growing cracks in the social safety net of one of the wealthiest cities in the world. And in today's video, we'll step into that world, the world of mobile cities, narrow dark cabins, and people who still go to work every day but have to sleep by the side of the road every night, to understand why New York is becoming a city of RV camps, and why a big dream can be so small when left outdoors. RV life was once the image of a shiny sprinter rolling through the Mojave Desert, or a young couple setting up a makeshift kitchen beside a redwood forest. It's a lifestyle built on the idea of freedom, of people who choose to leave the city to seek proactive minimalism. But in New York, that shadow of freedom has been distorted. The RVs here don't bear the marks of tourist sun, but rather the traces of people who have fallen out of the housing system. Those who can't afford the $3,500 monthly rent, or who have no hope of getting on the 7-year waiting list for affordable housing. Amidst the metal ribbons of Long Island City, along the banks of the Bronx River, or in the quiet shadows of Staten Island, another city is emerging, one that doesn't appear in any urban reports. There, minivans with curtains or faded RVs after more than a decade of use. The people living in those vehicles are nothing like the romantic image that society has associated with van life culture. That's the 52-year-old nurse who had to leave her rented room when the landlord increased the price by an additional $800 in 1 year. That was a veteran sleeping in a pickup truck with 3 children just because the subsidy she received wasn't enough to rent a home for the whole family. He's a retired teacher with a $1,800 monthly pension who now has to squeeze into an old Ford Econoline. While living in an RV in the American West is sometimes associated with a spirit of adventure, in New York it's more like a suspended sentence. Not a choice, but a direct consequence of the gap between low incomes, rising living costs, and an overburdened support system. There are no safe parking areas for people living in vehicles. Stopping in the same location for more than 72 hours is not permitted. RV parks will not accept vehicles older than 10 years. And most importantly, they are not counted as homeless by statistical standards because they do not sleep on the sidewalk or in a tent. That makes them a class of people outside the definition, existing but unseen. New York City has approximately 158,000 homeless individuals, with 96.4% living in shelters and only 3.6% sleeping outdoors. This number seems accurate, but it completely misses anyone living in a vehicle. They're not on the streets, but they also don't have homes. Not in a shelter, but also not stable enough to be considered housed. They lie between the two lines, belonging to neither side, a grey area that policy doesn't know how to locate. The gap between rent and income has given rise to cities on wheels. When rents hit $3,500 per month and median income is only around $76,000 per year, a used RV costing $8,000, $15,000, paid only once, becomes the last resort. A studio apartment costing $42,000 per year is a non-starter for someone earning $30,000, $40,000. The question, why do they choose to live in cars, should probably be replaced with, do they have any other options? And like any community, these mobile cities also have their own rules. People living in vehicles avoid police patrol hours. automatically relocate before the 72-hour mark, choose dimly lit parking lots to avoid being reported by residents, find Wi-Fi for their children to do homework, and move to different districts whenever there's a cleanup campaign. They don't live a stable life. They just live temporarily each night, a survival rhythm that's always counting down. The consequences of those mobile cities are not just the loss of housing. It exposes an urban layer detached from the official map, a layer of workers who still go to work every day, still maintain the rest of their lives, but must live in the shadows without addresses, rights, or being counted. Finally, the RV community in New York is not a trace of the minimalist movement. They are a mirror reflecting the widening social safety net gap, where a city of lights is superimposed on another city, silently, wearily, and existing right beneath its feet. How many lives are silently passing through those dark cabins, right in the heart of the world's largest financial center, without ever being counted in any official figures? And if RV life once meant freedom, what should its New York version today be called to accurately reflect its true nature? New York used to be a place where a small apartment, even if not spacious, was still affordable for hard-working people. But in recent years, the pace of rental price increases has surpassed all previous norms, leaving a gap that many families can no longer afford to bridge. The average price is around $3,500 a month, an abstract figure on its own, but a steep incline when compared to the income of millions of workers. To avoid being rent-burdened, a typical family needs an income nearly double the median income, a threshold that very few people can reach, even if they work full-time year-round. The gap between the cost of living and income has widened significantly since the pandemic. As tenant protection orders expire, eviction lawsuits are starting to return like a cold wind straight into households that are already struggling. Just a few months of reduced working hours, a single hospital stay, or outstanding debt from difficult times can lead to a family being evicted from the apartment they've called home for many years. It's not because they're lazy or irresponsible, but because the cost of living has entered a phase beyond the prediction of even those who have weathered many previous fluctuations. Many people place their hopes in rental subsidies, but the reality is that this safety net only helps a small fraction of those who are eligible. Limited voucher quantities, lengthy approval times, and strict criteria left thousands of families outside the door of support. Without enough subsidies or savings, they are right on the brink of losing their homes due to a small life change. An unexpected medical bill, a car repair bill, or a shortened overtime shift can also tip the financial scales dangerously. Affordable housing is becoming increasingly scarce, forcing many families to consider temporary options they'd have to. Sleeping in their cars, renting cheap motel rooms, or crowding into already overcrowded shelters. Those choices aren't solutions, but rather options for holding on, avoiding being caught in a spiral of debt, and preventing oneself from falling straight to the bottom of society just because of rent that's out of reach. Those who have lived in the city for decades are now the group most acutely feeling this decline. They witnessed a time when New York still had room for the working class, when rents rose steadily but not unbearably, and when the opportunity to stay in the city didn't weigh on their shoulders like a punishment. So, the car, which was only meant for transportation, suddenly became the ultimate shelter. No deposit required, no contract needed, no proof of income necessary. But its temporary stability also brought other consequences: uncertainty, constant vigilance, fear of being towed away one night, and long days spent on the margins of the city they still help to maintain. What will a city become when even the hardest working people can't afford a small roof over their heads? When the cost of survival exceeds the affordability of the majority, housing is no longer a foundation. It becomes a battle that too many have lost. And from here, a new cycle begins. As housing slips out of reach, those who choose to live in their vehicles must step into another world, where time is not measured in days and months, but by white chalk marks on tyres and 72-hour countdown clocks. Amidst industrial parking lots or quiet stretches of road in New York, life in an RV or minivan isn't just determined by whether it starts or the weather that day. It's also governed by a cold number, 72 hours. The regulation that parking is not allowed for longer than that period, which seemed like a measure to maintain urban order, has become a noose tightening the lives of those for whom their vehicle is their last home. After just over 72 hours, the vehicle, which is also the only shelter, can be fined or towed. Everything they owned was packed into that car: clothes, documents, work tools, and sometimes even medication for chronic illnesses. When the car was towed away, they didn't just lose their property. They lost their livelihood, their shelter, and the fragile independence they had been trying to maintain. For many, not being able to redeem their vehicle means losing their entire previous life in just one morning. Tension crept in every night. Those living in vehicles never sleep soundly. They are always alert to outside noises, the sweeping lights of police cars, or the white chalk marks on the wheels that signal the countdown has begun. Even freezing winter nights or days when they were sick didn't grant them the privilege of a few extra hours of rest. No matter their health, they still had to turn the key and move the car elsewhere, as if their existence had to be tied to every mandatory step. There were street cleaning sessions that happened unexpectedly, forcing them to leave even while they were still sleeping in their cars. Being forced to leave their parking spot wasn't just a change of location. It was like being uprooted, pushed into an unwanted journey where they had to find a new corner of the road, hoping to avoid the disapproving glances of nearby residents and calls to the police. Every seat change is a gamble. Is the new place safe? Did anyone report it to the authorities? Did they get a parking ticket while they were at work? Each stretch of road became a problem of prolonged anxiety, as every parking decision could be the final mistake before losing everything. The 72-hour law, from an order management perspective, may be necessary for a crowded city. But for those living on the margins of society, it turns every day into an endless race. A seemingly simple regulation could cause their roof, which only had 4 wheels, to disappear at any moment. And from that, natural questions arise. How can a person maintain composure when their only living space could disappear just because they parked longer than allowed? Are the rules created to maintain order actually solving the problem, or are they just pushing vulnerable people into a precarious existence? But the law is only part of the story. Another, quieter, but no less sharp, lies right in the way the city is designed, where benches, curbs, and public spaces also become a language of power for the homeless. When someone is forced to move every 72 hours, they're not just racing against the law. They also clashed with a more silent power, the very architecture of the city they were trying to hold on to. New York is entering a phase of public infrastructure reconstruction with a new logic, where benches, vents, awnings, and train station waiting areas are no longer simply for rest. They became tools of social planning, determining who was allowed to be present and who was forced to leave. Seating, the most basic element of a public space, is gradually disappearing or being distorted. Many train stations and bus stops are replacing benches with narrow leaning bars, forcing people to only lean against them for a few minutes before leaving. There was no surface long enough for anyone to lie down or sit for long, and even the elderly, pregnant women or people with disabilities had difficulty waiting for the train. A city once built to serve people seems to be adjusting human needs for rest itself. The ventilation holes that once provided warmth to those seeking shelter from the winter cold are now covered with rough metal sheets. An area that once offered warmth to the homeless on freezing nights has now become a cold, hard surface, almost intentionally designed to be inaccessible. Meanwhile, multi-billion-dollar projects, from modern train stations to new commercial areas, are being built with very few public benches, creating a sense of a standing city where sitting down is implicitly discouraged. The handrail system divides the seats into small sections, with slightly sloped or uneven surfaces and reduced seating space. All of which might seem like mere design choices, but are in fact a policy language, preventing the homeless from resting, forcing them to leave spaces that the city considers unsuitable for their presence. That abandonment doesn't just affect the homeless. Many ordinary residents also feel unwelcome in the very spaces they once considered familiar. A night shift worker wanting a few minutes rest at the train station, an elderly person wanting to sit and wait for a friend, or a passenger with tired legs from a long journey. They all realize the city is gradually becoming harsh on the human body itself. As public spaces shrink, natural shelters disappear, and every street corner becomes an underground forbidden zone. The hope of finding support for the homeless becomes more fragile than ever. And it is precisely in that fragility that we touch upon another story, about a support system that was supposed to be a lifeline, but often only appears after everything has collapsed. As public spaces become increasingly inaccessible, many homeless individuals, especially those living in vehicles, turn to the shelter system as a last resort. But New York, despite having the largest shelter network in the country with over 127,000 beds, is still overwhelmed. The number of people needing housing increased dramatically in just a few years, making even the largest safety net insufficient to catch everyone who is falling. In reality, many people try to avoid going to shelters because they are afraid of losing their safety, or simply they cannot bring what they have left. A person who lives by their tools cannot leave them behind overnight. A delivery driver cannot be separated from their vehicle, which is their sole source of income. A person who has lost their home cannot entrust emotionally valuable items, or medication, paperwork, to temporary spaces that lack personal lockers, have no locks, and do not guarantee their safety by the next morning. Rental assistance programs designed to keep people in their apartments are only accessible to a small fraction of those who need them most. Complex approval conditions, long waiting lists, limited number of vouchers, all of which mean that the homeless often only receive assistance when things have already gone beyond the point of no return. Many families are left homeless after losing their jobs, losing their cars, or when their illnesses worsen, and only then are they recognized by the system as eligible for support. The situation became even more difficult when the city had to accommodate a large wave of asylum seekers. They are not the sole cause of the crisis, but their sudden influx in a short period has put an additional strain on an already stressed system. Shelter beds were already limited and are filling up even faster now. The processing time for assistance is lengthy, and temporary shelters are constantly rotating people to keep up with the exploding demand. This gap is not a minor oversight in policy. It is a crack that runs through the entire welfare structure. And it raises inevitable questions. If a system designed to protect the vulnerable only appears after they've lost everything, who is that system ultimately serving? Can it be considered enough when those who need it most, the homeless, the unemployed, those who have lost their cars and their health, are left outside the door of support? And to better understand the people being overlooked in the policy gap, we must look at them directly. Those living in vehicles, navigating their daily lives in a precarious existence that the city has never properly named. When first looking at the rows of old cars parked along the road, many people only see worn metal, faded paint, and simple curtains. But behind those frosted glass doors is a much more diverse group of people than the familiar images of the homeless. These aren't just the left behind. They're New Yorkers who are still working every day, trying to survive in the city they once believed they belonged to. Most of them still have stable jobs. Restaurant staff leave their shifts at midnight. Security guards work from 3 in the morning. Delivery drivers travel across multiple districts. And electricians and construction workers end their long days with greasy hands. They work long hours, but still have to sleep in old cars parked by the side of the road. Not because they want to, but because their wages can't keep up with rent that's already far beyond the reach of a working-class family. There are people who earn nearly $50,000 a year, a figure that used to be enough to rent a small apartment. But today, they can't access any options that are safe and legal enough. The car, originally just for transportation, became a permanent shelter, even though the space wasn't tall enough to stand up straight and not wide enough to stretch out comfortably. The group most severely affected is families with young children. Over 50,000 children without stable housing have had to learn to do their homework in the back seat, brush their teeth with water bottles in the car, and sleep each night with the worry of whether the car will still be there in the morning or if it will be towed away. The number of elderly people in this group is also increasing. Those living on a fixed pension do not have enough to cover the cost of medication, doctor's visits, and rent. They spent their whole lives working, believing that old age would be a time for rest. But, in reality, many people have to choose to live in their cars to avoid falling into debt or losing access to minimal healthcare services. Looking at the faces in the dark cabins, we see a second city. A city forgotten not because it's too small, but because it is too silent. Each vehicle holds a story that New York has never fully heard, the story of those who still work hard, still contribute to the city, but are forced to live on the margins of the very metropolis they help operate every day. When we identify who they are, we also clearly see what they are lacking. Not only is there a lack of housing, but also a lack of the minimum conditions for a human being to live a meaningful life. And that brings us to the next part. What happens when someone no longer has the space to care for their health or maintain their own safety? In New York, there are lights so bright that no one can see the darkness right at their feet. There are roads so busy that no one can hear the sighs coming from the cars parked silently at the curb. But amidst that bustling city, another New York still exists, where people live day by day in the gap between the law, the cost of survival, and urban designs not meant for them. A New York where old RVs, curtained minivans, and cramped cabins become symbols of resilience rather than defeat. Those stories are not meant to make anyone pessimistic. They only remind us that behind every silent space, there are always people working harder than we imagine. And when you look at them, you don't just see poverty. You see a bigger question about how a city cares for the people who have contributed to keeping it running. If today's story made you think, if you've ever seen a car parked for ages on the corner of your street that you pass every day, or if you have any experiences related to urban life and housing, please leave a comment. Your sharing can help another story be seen. If you found this video helpful, please like, subscribe, and share it so more people can learn about a part of New York that few mention. Your small interactions are what help the channel continue to produce in-depth content that respects the truth. The content in this video is based on materials, records, and data that have been provided in documents related to homelessness in New York. All information is presented for the purpose of analysis, education, and raising public awareness, not for political purposes, and does not make personal or organizational accusations. Viewers are kindly requested to receive this information in this context. The views expressed in the video are intended only to reflect a multifaceted picture and do not substitute for legal, medical, or professional policy advice.